Good afternoon, all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari. So today in this video, we are going to discuss about the important articles for 17th of January 2023. So firstly, from economy, we see that exports, they dropped by 12.2% in 1 year because of slow demand. And we can say that we are beginning to see the impact of global slowdown when we talk about the performance of our exports, or we can say the trade sector. So in this graph also, you can see how our exports, our imports, and where the trade deficit stands. So our trade deficit has increased, and you can look at these figures also. Then talking about the buffer zones which are around, or which are the buffer areas around the core protected regions. So firstly, you should be knowing that when we talk about the buffer areas or the buffer zones, few activities are allowed there, but that too, they are, I would say they are limited. And in core areas, absolutely no activity can take place. So no human interventions are allowed in the core areas. So this thing should be clear with you. And coming to the editorial section, so here again we are talking about the importance of the address by the governor when we talk about his address to the session of the, we can say, the legislative assembly when we're talking about governor, and session of the parliament when we talk about the case of president. So we have been discussing about this topic. So again, will be taking up the important articles related to the governor's address. So we have article 176 and article 175. So firstly, we'll be looking at what is the difference between them. So starting with article 176 of the constitution, it requires the governor to mandatorily address the members of legislature at the commencement of the first session every year, and to inform them about the cause of the summon of the house. So here what is important is that it is mentioning the word mandatory. So the governor's address is mandatory as per article 176, and the constitution, it gives a specific direction to the house to find time to discuss the contents of the governor's address. So once the address has been delivered by the governor, now it becomes the next step, we can say that the assembly has to discuss about that address also. And this is the only thing we can say that constitution mentions about finding out about time to discuss the contents of the governor's address. And it says that the governor may address the legislature, and for that purpose, he requires obviously the attendance of a minimum amount of members in the House. And the address under Article 175, it is not mandatory. So that is, we can say, the first point of difference when we're talking about Article 176 and 175. So, the reason behind the Constitution making such a distinction in these two articles, which is talking about the same thing, that the basically governor's address to the House, we see that the address under Article 176 contains the policies and the programs of the elected government of the state, which is accountable to the legislature. And when we talk about the essence of the parliamentary democracy, so the executive's accountability to the elected representatives of the people is the essence of the parliamentary democracy, and we need to safeguard this thing. And talking about what are the other issues between the governor and the governments in different states. So we see that the actions by governors in some of the opposition, specifically when we are talking about the states ruled by the opposition parties in different states, we see that there in those states, the governor, they tend to sit on a bill that has been passed by the state assembly without exercising any of the options that are given by the constitution, and thus they lead to frustrating the entire legislative exercise. And it is clearly against the mandate of the constitution, because constitution does not give the governor the option to sit on a bill that has been passed by the assembly. And however, we see that the governor, they seem to assume that since it does not lay down any time frame for providing assent to the bill, so they try to assume that they have the entire power, and they have the freedom to not take any decision or not giving assent to a legislation that has been passed by the assembly. And this definitely leads to violation of article 200 of the constitution. So this article requires that governor to either give the assent, or he or she can withhold the assent, or send the bill back to the assembly for reconsideration. But when it is sent for reconsideration, and if the assembly passes the bill again in the same form without any change or amendment, the governor has to give the assent to the bill, and he or she can also send the bill for the consideration of the president also. But this Article 200 nowhere mentions that the governor can withhold the assent to the bill. And talking about the Supreme Court judgments in this regard, so we see that in 1974 we had the Shamsher Singh judgment, and in 2016 we had the Nabam Rabia judgment. So the Supreme Court has consistently held that governors can act only and only on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers that has been elected by the people of a state, and the governor cannot exercise any executive powers independently, ignoring the elected government. So this is, we can say, what has been upheld by the Supreme Court. And when we talk about the Shamsher Singh judgment, so the Supreme Court said that the Constitution does not aim at providing a parallel administration within the state by allowing the governor to go against the advice of the Council of Ministers. So here they've talked about the parallel administration, which are, we can say, run by the governor specifically in the opposition ruled states. So if the constitutional authorities they willfully cross the line and they overstrain the system, democracy will be in peril. So these were some new dimensions and new articles that were important for this topic, and we have covered them all. Now, talking about, since we and also the government is coming ahead when it comes to promoting the digital payments. So, in this case, in this new emerging scenario, and also the, we can say, the growth that we saw in digital payments during the COVID-19 pandemic, now it becomes important to ensure that we safeguard and we ensure the safety, we undertake the safety measures when it comes to cyber security. So a few days ago, we saw that government is providing funds to the banks to promote the digital payments so that they can build up more digital infrastructure. So, and talking about the Reserve Bank of India's payments vision of 2025 document also, it also observes that the payment systems they foster economic development and financial stability while supporting the financial inclusion. So this is what the RBI's document has to say, that when we are talking about promoting the digital payment, so that is basically, we can say, for improving the economic development and growth, for maintaining financial stability in the economy, and supporting financial inclusion. So these are, we can say, basically the objectives behind promoting a digital payments. And we know that in India, we have seen how the unified payment interface, that is UPI, that is, we can say, it is owned by the National Payments Corporation of India, how it has performed so amazingly. And looking at the data, we see that we saw a jump of 71% when we talk about the volume of the UPI transactions, and 55% increase in the value from a year earlier period in case of UPI transactions. And on the other hand, another important component when we talk about the digital transactions is our indigenous RuPay credit and debit cards. So that is also one thing. And again, as we started with that, it is important for us to maintain and to ensure cyber security. And also, you should be knowing that the parliament is coming up with a digital India bill also. So you can go ahead and have a look at what are the features of that bill, because it is yet to be passed by the parliament. Now, talking about, since we are expecting a budget from the union government, so we are seeing articles regarding maintaining balance between fiscal consolidation and growth. So here also we are having crucial data to be discussed. And how the government can go ahead while ensuring fiscal consolidation and growth at the same time. So, when we talk about fiscal consolidation, so the main idea behind it is to reduce the fiscal deficit. So, there are two possible options in front of the government when we talk about reducing the fiscal deficit. Firstly, it can reduce its expenditure, and second option is by increasing the revenues. So when we talk about reducing the expenditure by the government, so we say that obviously it can have negative impacts about our growth prospects. So that's how it becomes important that we are ensuring and we are successful in maintaining a sustainable balance between these two components, that is fiscal consolidation and growth. Now let's start with this article. So this has been written by two important personalities, and we expected that the year 2022 was going to be normal, but because of the Russia Ukraine war, it did not turn out to be as we expected the year to be. And we see that because of the Russia Ukraine war, we saw supply chain disruptions, which led to disruption of imports, which led to inflation of food and fuel prices, of fertilizers. And as a result, we saw growth slow down, and definitely that impacted India as well. But when we compare India's growth with other countries, India has performed really nicely. And we need to move on to a high growth path beginning the current year, that is 2023. So in this context, what should be the focus of the upcoming budget to achieve a steady high growth with reasonable price stability? So for that, when we talk about the growth performance, so here you can read it is the data regarding the GDP growth. So we can skip because here there are projections which are given. Now we'll talk about the fiscal deficit first. So we saw because of the COVID-19 pandemic, government has to increase the expenditure, which led to the increase in the fiscal deficit to the tune of 9.2% of GDP, and this was more than three times the original fiscal responsibility and the Budget Management Act's target of 3%. So the target under this FRBM Act is 3% for fiscal deficit. However, it shoot up to a 9.2% because of COVID-19. And in the two succeeding years, the fiscal deficit, it could be reduced to 6.7% and 6.4% respectively. So that is there. And so firstly, we need to reduce our fiscal deficit. Obviously, that is going to happen at a gradual scale. Then we are talking about there is a need to recognize the challenge to India's growth prospects in view of the global economic slowdown. So because of the global slowdown, our exports performance can be hampered, and that is one thing. So when we are already knowing, and when we started this today's video, we the first article that we saw was our decline in our exports growth. So we are already seeing the impacts of the global slowdown. So here it becomes important that we, considering this thing, it becomes important that we push the domestic sector ahead, and it becomes an important factor when we talk about our economic growth. And India has been able to achieve a growth in the range of 6 to 6.5% during 2023-24, provided there is a significant policy support is given to growth. So this amount of, we can say, growth can be achieved in the upcoming financial year. And when we talk about the saving investment balance, so there is a need for correction in the government's fiscal deficit primarily, which arises because of the relative profile of savings and investment as a proportion of GDP. So there's a need for correction in this. And financial savings in the household sector, it has averaged approximately at around 8% of GDP for 2017-18 to 2019-20 before it increased inordinately to 11.6% again because of COVID-19. And because we can say on a precautionary note, the people started saving more and spending less during the pandemic, and that's why we saw that the saving rates, it increased to 11.6%. But it has been, we can say, when we talk about the average, so it is at around 8% of the GDP. And if we target a reduction of 0.7 percent point in fiscal deficit in the upcoming financial year as compared to the current financial year, then the resulting fiscal deficit can be achieved at 5.7%, and that would imply availability of investable resources of 1.1% of the GDP for both the private corporate sector and the non-governmental public sector. So this can be financed by the household sector financial savings of about 8% of the GDP, and also can be supported by the inflow of the foreign capital of which is around 2.3% of GDP. So this is, we can say, when we talk about the saving and investment balance, that when we go ahead by reducing the fiscal deficit, we would be having an extra window, we can say, for investment that can be done by the private and the public sector, and that can be funded by the households savings and by the foreign capital inflow. So bringing down the fiscal deficit and charting out a glide path are essential for maintaining the price stability. So even obviously inflation plays a critical role, so we need to ensure price stability at the same time as well. And when we talk about the tax revenues of the government, so we expect that growth in the center's gross tax revenues in 2023-24 would be less than that in the current financial year. So this is because of the expected fall in the both real GDP and a deflator based inflation also. So because of the current data, so we are expecting that in the upcoming financial year, the government's tax revenues are going to fall. So fiscal support to growth would call for continuing emphasis on capital expenditure. So we have talked about that, how obviously government needs to do more of capital expenditure if we want to support the growth and have a rationalized, we can say, revenue expenditure. So here the government needs to be careful, and a careful calibration could be required for limiting the revenue expenditure growth in order to retain the space for the capital expenditure to grow adequately with a view to supporting the growth. So as we know that capital expenditure leads to asset formation, which is obviously very important when we talk about the growth in the long term. So all these things, all these factors that we discussed are important when we talk about maintaining balance between fiscal consolidation and growth. And also we can talk about the price stability. Then yesterday only we saw that, as per the Oxfam report, we saw that when we talk about income inequality in India, so the richest 1% population, which owns 40% of the country's total wealth. So this is the scale and the intensity of the income inequality in India, and definitely that needs to come down. And the report also contained that if we tax only India's top 10 richest people at 5%, so that could fetch us that could fetch us funds that will be sufficient to bring back all the children to school. So let's move ahead. So talking about artificial intelligence and a recent initiative that was ChatGPT, which went viral. So here we're talking about the ethics problem that we are encountering, that we are seeing how things emerging when we are talking about the usage of this platform, that is ChatGPT. So it is, we can say, it is the most recent and the powerful artificial intelligence chatbot. So it offers a range of answering questions across disciplines, and it's a search interface that could also generate fixes for the broken code, and it continues to attract diverse people to run their experimental questions on this platform. But at the same time, we are seeing some users have been testing its capability to do nefarious things and which are ethically not acceptable. And the users, they have claimed that it has helped them write malicious code also. So it is programmed to already it is programmed to block the obvious request of writing the phishing emails or code for hackers. But when we talk about plagiarism also, so teachers and academicians, they have also expressed concern that the chat GPT's impact on written assignments. So they note that the board, it could be used to turn in plagiarized essays that could be hard to detect. So that is also one of the concerns that has been arising. And it has also changed the way artificial intelligence is used to create new content. Then when we compare and contrast something to modern events or writing our own personal experiences, obviously that is not going to be possible from chat GPT. So this is one thing that we should be knowing, and this obviously needs to be addressed until it becomes uncontrollable. And the president of Egypt, he's been invited for the Republic Day celebration, so he's going to be the chief guest. And from the security perspective, so security of Suez Canal and the Red Sea, they connect Egypt with India and the Indian Ocean. So the main focus area or the main thing that connects India and Egypt is the security of Suez Canal and Red Sea, because it is an important channel when we talk about the trade routes globally. So talking about the Agnipath scheme, so our prime minister, he was addressing the first recruiters. So he said that Agniveers, they will make forces more youthful and tech savvy. So this can be one of the points for like supporting the argument when you're talking about the Agnipath scheme. Then ISRO, it is likely to delay its Venus mission, which is called as Shukriyan the one to 2031. It was expected that they would be launching it during mid 2023, but they are now feeling that it should be delayed because obviously because of the impact and the COVID-19. So that is cited as the reason behind the delay and the postponement. So Shukriyan 1 will be an orbiter mission, whose scientific payloads include high resolution synthetic aperture radar. And talking about the Venus missions of other countries, so US and European space agencies, they had Venus missions that are again planned for 2031, and they are named as Veritas. So Veritas is USA's and Envision is for Europe. So ISRO, it had originally hoped that it would be launching it in mid 2023, and other planned missions of ISRO, it includes Aditya L1 and Chandrayaan 3, so that have been affected by the manufacturing delays and the commercial launch commitments because of COVID-19. And so the mission, it is expected to study Venus geological and volcanic activities, emissions on the ground, its wind speed, cloud cover, and other planetary characteristics. So we'll be having a look at it again once it is close to 2031 or whatever decision is taken. Then talking about the marital rape. So Supreme Court is going to discuss on this issue from March 21st. And obviously it has a widespread social impact. So we'll just have a look at the Karnataka High Court's judgment. So it said that man is a man, an act is an act, rape is a rape. So be it performed by a man, the husband, or on the woman or wife. So right now we can say that marital rape, basically it is not an offense as of now. So there's a whole issue and a debate around this issue, so we'll take up once we have a nice and comprehensive article regarding this. And from the global news, so it is important for us to be aware about what is the 13th amendment when we talk about the Sri Lankan constitution. So recently the president, he has pledged to resolve the ethnic conflict, and when Sri Lanka is going to mark its 75th anniversary of independence. So the issue is, or what the 13th amendment relates to, is that it promises the Tamils that the government is going to take steps in order to ensure power devolution to the islands provinces. So he's promised it for both the northern provinces and the southern provinces also. So you should be knowing that the Sri Lankan Tamil majority, they reside in the northern province of Sri Lanka, that is in Jaffna. So they've been promised about power devolution, and this is, we can say, around 40-year-old issue, and that is there. So coming to the business page, we see that wholesale inflation, it slides to its 22-month low at 4.95%. So a positive news, and definitely we are going to see positive impacts because of slowdown in wholesale inflation. So when we see that wholesale inflation, it reduces, so definitely it has an impact on, we can say, in terms of reduction on the retail or the CPI inflation also. So We see that this is the second month in a row that the wholesale inflation, it has been lower than the retail inflation, and that is there. So RBI now it moves that expected loss based model. So RBI has come up with an expected loss based model for provisioning by the bank. So you should be knowing what is provisioning. Provisioning is basically when a bank it lends money to the borrower, it has to keep certain amount aside, which is known as provisioning, and that is obviously if there is any default in future by the borrower when it comes to repayment of the loan, so then we can say that the risk can be reduced to the bank. So for that purpose, RBI has come up with an expected loss based model for provisioning. So the banks they would be allowed to design and implement this their own model for measuring the expected credit losses for the purpose of estimating the loss provisions in line with the proposed principles. And definitely RBI would also be helping these banks. And we see that as per a study, disruption to supply chains is the top business risk, and which is, we can say, 87% of the firms in India has to believe. So obviously with supply chain disruptions, we have seen how it can impact businesses globally with COVID-19. And let's move on to the Financial Express. So in Financial Express, we'll take up this news. So here, the regulator, that is the National Financial Reporting Authority, it has released the reporting standards for the audit firms, and this is going to help and aid and boost the investors' confidence. So they have come up with new norms regarding the preparation and publication of the annual transparency report. So this is going to improve the credibility of the auditors also, and the regulator, that is when I just told that it is the National Financial Reporting Authority, that is the regulator of the auditing firms. So they they are the regulator for the auditing profession and the accounting standards. So the idea behind these updated or the new norms is to make the audited entities and their shareholders aware about the management, the ownership structure, and the governance of these audit firms and their internal policy frameworks. It is also the annual transparency report is also expected to, and it is prevent the conflict of interest that the auditors might encounter. And also they'll now have to release the critical information about the auditors operational activities, their management, governance, and ownership. Then it also includes a detailed description of the statutory auditors, and also include the details about their network if they have any. And the auditors, they would also be expected to provide information about their total revenues. Uh, Sorry, and this annual transparency report, it would need clearance from the officials authorized to approve the financial statements of the statutory auditors and will then be filed with the regulator. Then we'll directly come to the last article for today. So, which is regarding the offer for sale. So, the SEBI, that is Securities and Exchange Board of India, it has released new rules for offer for sale. So what is OFS? So it is in it, the promoters of a company, they can dilute their holdings, basically their shares, by selling them on an exchange platform, and qualified institutional buyers and the retail investors, they can bid for these shares. So companies can use this route to raise additional capital, and they can dilute their promoter holdings. So this is a much simpler and easy route for the promoters to dilute their stake and raise capital. So the another option for this is the follow on public offering, which we can say it is a little complex when compared to the offer for sale route. So basically that is more lengthy process also. So even both these cases or both these processes, they are two ways to raise the capital by selling your additional shares by the company. So then talking about the new rules that has been released by SEBI. So It has now allowed the non-promoter shareholders to offload their stake in the publicly traded company through the OFS route. And at present, only the promoters or the promoter group entities, they were allowed to sell their stake. So now even SEBI, it has now allowed the non-promoter shareholders also. And talking about the eligibility conditions, so the companies with a market capitalization of rupees 1000 crores and above would be eligible, and this will be calculated as the average daily market capitalization over the past 6 months period, and the cooling off period has been reduced to 2 weeks. So 10% of the offer is going to be reserved for the retail investors, and the minimum size of the offer should be rupees 25 crores. So what are going to be the benefits of these new rules? It will be basically widening the retail participation, and it has been made available to the unit holders and the sellers of the listed REITs and the invites, that is the infrastructure investment trust and the real estate investment trust, so they can offer their holdings as well. So these are going to be the potential benefits that are expected. And that's all for today. Thank you for joining Ansarkari. Do not forget to subscribe our channel, hit the like button, and share this video as much as possible. And also you'll get the PDF link in the description box. So definitely go through the PDF as well. See you tomorrow.